Guys, I'm really happy to welcome back to the podcast Dr. Darren Beattie. Darren is the CEO and the publisher of Revolver News, which is, for me, indispensable. They do terrific, in-depth investigative reports. You should check them out at revolver.news. Darren, thanks for coming on again. I've been reading your exposés one on top of the other, and I'm sort of drawing a big picture out of them, which maybe we can start with this. It's almost as if you're depicting America as, the late Roman Empire. Things are sort of falling apart. The wheels are coming off. The place is overextended. There's no accountability. People are fiddling while Rome burns. And the opposition, which is supposed to keep things in check, is either absent or derelict itself. And so as a result, you've just got a system completely unhinged and out of control. Am I going too far, or am I accurately summarizing the picture that emerges from the individual portraits that you paint in your articles?
No, I think that's fairly accurate, and it provides a kind of general rubric within which to understand some of the most important trends going on in our politics in our country. I think one of those trends, which is a consistent theme throughout Revolver's work, both investigative and in terms of the opinions and analysis, is this repurposing of the national security apparatus in the United States domestically in order to silence and suppress energies associated with populism, with Trump's victory, but also increasingly so energies even on the populist left, and really anything that would seriously challenge or dare to contradict the increasingly narrow scope of acceptable opinions within the American regime. That's a big development. And how does this connect to this notion that America is sort of this big, bloated empire that's on its last legs and sort of running off of inertia? I think it connects in a number of ways. Firstly, I think that we're seeing America's transition into a full-on ideological state, which we might contrast with something like China, which seems increasingly pragmatic. America is in an ideological state, and the ideology of wokeness, which is pretty close to the official ideology of the American regime, is increasingly integrated into every single institution and how those institutions function, which we can get to later in the Buttigieg article. And I think what this means is internally, you're going to see more and more totalitarianism domestically in order for the dying empire to maintain control over its citizens. And internationally, you're going to see an increasing collapse in prestige and power and ability to project force. And you're going to see other emerging geopolitical powers increasingly look at the United States not as traditionally a model to follow, but as a model to avoid, which is something that we can talk about as well.
Darren, I'm just listening to you, and I'm putting your comments in a little bit of historical perspective, by which I mean, if I look at them, if you had spoken this way to me 10 years ago, or certainly in the 1980s or 90s, I would have thought that I was in a madhouse. In other words, this would bear no resemblance to my experience of America at all. And the idea that we would mobilize the national security state against domestic citizens, parents, right, and so on, would seem downright crazy. So the question I have for you is, was there a particular fulcrum, a turning point at which we sort of went from being the good guys fighting the bad Soviet Union, the guys who were trying to make America a prosperous society and an example to the world? How did we become, in a sense, this monster that we now have to fear our own government?
Right. Well, that's a very interesting question, and of course, it depends what dimension we want to answer it, because I think there's some extent to which now we're simply noticing the evolution and crystallization of trends and underlying currents that have existed in this country for a long time. It's simply for various reasons we didn't quite notice them at their earlier stages. But I think that's an issue perhaps for a separate conversation. I think to the immediate question as to like, was there an inflection point or so forth? I don't think there was a single inflection point, but I do think that there was sort of an underlying system in place, and a lot was baked into the cake. And the major disruptive points that helped to catalyze the position that we're in now, certainly September 11th, 2001. This served as the kind of pretext upon which to build a lot of the apparatus that exists today. It served as the pretext to build to erode a lot of the liberties and protections that may have helped us out, might help us out in this position. And generally, I think it just served as an inflection point in terms of the scope, the power of the government, and the bureaucratic apparatus. That's definitely one. I think the 2008 financial collapse was another sort of inflection point that helped to sort of exacerbate a lot of those pre-existing trends toward extreme sort of more equality in society and so forth. And then the not to be dismissed at all, and perhaps the most important, there was the rise of populism, which was a profound challenge to what they call the rules-based order, which is, of course, rule-breaking mafia that controls the country, essentially. They call it the rules-based order, the international order, and so forth. And the rise of populism, first in Britain as Brexit, and then as the election of Trump, was terrifying and profoundly disruptive. And insofar as the free and open internet was a vehicle to allow this to happen, the internet had to be crushed and censored, which we've seen so forth. And we just saw a profound backlash and a profound consolidation of power across every institution in order to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
And of
just
course,
as kind of a cap on that, I think it is very important to understand that the national security apparatus from the very beginning perceived the populist energies as a profound threat. And if I might even introduce something somewhat controversial, I do think it's sort of somewhat contingent, somewhat not contingent, that Russia played a big role in all of this, because there was the invasion of Crimea in 2014, I believe. This was a profound threat to NATO, or perceived as a threat. And then just year after, you had the Brexit and populist phenomenon, and they decided, well, you know what? These are both profound national security threats. We can kill two birds with one stone by linking the Russia issue with the populist issue in people's minds, however divorced this is from reality. And a byproduct of that is a generalization, which is to say that any expression of populism, whether it be immigration restriction and so forth, these are framed not simply as things they disagree with, not simply as, white supremacist, racist, the usual terms. They're recategorized in this context as national security threats. And when opinions are national security threats, that means there's no more room for discussion, which I think is essentially the point that we're at now.
When we come back, I want to look at a couple of Revolver articles and exposés that illustrate the themes we've been talking about. We'll be right back.